Welcome to the Meaning Mindset with Rabbi Ron. This is our 13th episode of the second season, and we're really enjoying the growth of the podcast audience and the responses that we're getting from all of you all over the world. So thank you very much for your support. It makes this work deeply gratifying. Today, I want to go off track to some degree in terms of what we've been doing. And I want to begin, first of all, with a warning and talk about the fact that I will be talking about violence and political violence here. So you might want to just think about whether or not this is appropriate for your ears or people around you. And I want to begin with clarity. What you're about to hear is in relation to the murder of Charlie Kirk, a public figure in the United States. And it's not a eulogy, and it's not a political argument for or against him. It's a chance, I believe, to do something with what we now know. It's something a little more useful, I think, than what I could have done in adding to the countless voices that are out there telling you about Charlie Kirk. I'll say this, that on September 10th, during a live event at Utah Valley University, Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. He was murdered in public in front of hundreds or thousands of people. He always had large audiences. And the responsibility for that act belongs only to the shooter. But if we stop there, and I do stop there for a moment, if we only say one man and one trigger, what we might be missing is other lessons that we might be learning about the larger ecosystem that makes political violence possible in Utah, in the United States, and around the world. And the truth that I realize, and that I think you know as well, is that most violence begins in the microcosm, that's in homes and in communities, and in the macrocosm in the world, long before the first act of violence. It begins with words. And as a rabbi, I'll tell you that we have a long wisdom tradition, as you know, which is from the Torah. And one of the ideas that we have is a beautiful idea and a powerful and warning, cautionary idea that God creates, the Creator creates the world through words. God says, and it comes to being. And maybe the idea for you, whether you believe in that story as history or not, even spiritual history or not, is that words are that powerful. You and I are creating worlds with words. Today, I want to walk you through how words move from debate to contempt, and from contempt to dehumanization, and from dehumanization to permission, and from permission to violence. I'll give you a framework that I want to call the 5 crossings, because I think there is a sequence of 5 crossings. I want to anchor it in one of the most chilling cautionary stories of our time, or recent time, which is what happened not in Utah, not in the United States, but in Rwanda. We'll draw wisdom from various traditions that offer wisdom in relation to this story. And I intend to end with some practical tools that you can use immediately, because this isn't just about public figures, it's about each one of us. So before I go into that, I just want to say a little about myself for you who don't know me. I'm a rabbi. I'm a religious figure. I lead a community. I spend my life in spaces where people typically disagree. Disagreement is welcomed. In fact, it's hallowed. It's something that we do. We disagree on text. We disagree on interpretation. We disagree on practice. That's fine. The tradition that I come from, in which I lead, welcomes a multiplicity of thoughts and interpretations. So sometimes, in addition, just like every single one of us, I step into spaces of disagreement that are about politics, that are about culture, that are about community life, anything. You and I know that we live always in proximity to disagreement. And one of the things I've learned that the way that we speak to each other doesn't just reflect our relationship, it shapes our relationship as well. Another aspect of my work is in interreligious diplomacy. What this means is I sit across the table from heads of state, from diplomats, from religious figures, And I know going into the room and into those meetings and conversations that we come from vastly different walks of life and vastly different perspectives. How we dialogue, how we engage is critically important and fosters the relationship, even if it doesn't produce immediately visible or tangible outcomes. So what I want to offer today isn't so much a commentary as it is a kind of map, a map of how society slips toward violence, how ordinary people can get in the way of that violence. And what I want to say in advance is, let's not despair. Not now, not ever. Let's travel for a moment to Rwanda, as I mentioned, 1993. Some of you know exactly where I'm leading you. I haven't been to Rwanda. I've been to that part of Africa many, many times, East Africa. It's a country of hills, of farms, neighbors sharing markets, weddings, baptisms in small churches. It's a time and a place of life lived side by side. Into that ordinary life that you and I would expect and would smile upon seeing came a radio station. And the radio station, I'll mispronounce the French, but forgive me, Radio Télévision Libre de Mille Collines, RTLM. At first, it was harmless. It was what we would expect. It was pop songs. It was sports. It was jokes. People loved it. Radios were cheap and they were everywhere. And I've seen that in so many places where I've traveled. Everybody listened. You'd see men on work breaks at lunch. They'd be sitting on crates or on boxes or stumps of trees. Actually, sometimes I remember they'd be sitting around radios listening and laughing. Now came a shift. Broadcasters began joking, but the jokes changed. They weren't the same kinds of jokes that as Houthis and Tutsis had joked about before. These were about the Tutsis, and they called them Inyenzi. Inyenzi translates to English as cockroaches. And you can imagine that people laughed because all of us have grown up in societies in which we've heard jokes about the other in our society. It's just a joke. But repetition works like water carving a stone. Cockroach became not something that was just heard on the radio. It became common currency in the culture. It was the first crossing of the 5 crossings that I want to delve into. It was the crossing from disagreement, I'll say, to contempt. Now you can say, well, what do they disagree with? Many, many things about each other, about the way they lived their lives, about their claim on the land. There were so many disagreements before we got to this point of disagreement turning to contempt. Contempt doesn't just say that you're wrong. And think about this. Contempt is you are somehow less than me. If you're contemptible to me, then I am in the power dynamic. I'm lifting myself above you. And every time I indulge in that contempt, I maintain my higher status in our little social order. Contempt erodes, it corrodes. It's the most toxic indicator or predictor, according to John Gottman, the psychologist, of divorce in a marriage. How do you see contempt? Watch people on video, watch eye rolling. That's a sign of contempt. It's the greatest, most toxic predictor of divorce in marriage. So think about what it does in the marriage of society. And in politics, it actually corrodes democracy. You know, when we're not taking each other seriously, when we're rolling each other's eyes, our eyes at each other's ideas and our personas, the other in society, what we're doing is saying, I no longer look to you as an equal human being on the basis of, and let's talk about those bases. But first I want to ask you a question. How do you think we counter contempt while still having the right to our disagreements? Because I'm not suggesting that you or I need to stop good disagreement. In fact, I embrace good disagreement. Confucius taught, it was about name calling, what he said. He said, when names aren't correct, in other words, when we're inaccurate in how we characterize each other, what is said is not reasonable. So think about what Confucius is teaching us. When your names, when your words, when your verbiage isn't accurate, isn't precise, what is said is not, cannot be, I'll add, reasonable, governed by reason, Precision is the antidote to contempt. Say what you need to say, but say it without a sneer. At all costs, avoid name calling. You and I see it, we hear it, and hopefully it disgusts us. Hopefully we don't excuse it, regardless of who's saying it, regardless of which side they're on, whether it's in politics or religion or ideology or sports, whatever it is. What it does, name calling, is it stops real communication in its tracks. We are stopped in our tracks when people resort to that, and you and I know exactly what I'm talking about. So as contempt spread in Rwanda, the second of the 5 crossings emerged. It was a crossing from contempt to dehumanization. The radio station RTLM repeated the cockroach line until it stuck. And you might remember how this happened in history in other countries with devastating effect. The Nazi press in the 1930s and 40s, it used the mouthpiece, the press, the Nazi party, used it to depict Jewish people as rats. You saw images of Jewish people as rats. You saw verbiage that described human beings as rats. Think about American slavery. One of the common characterizations of black people in America was that they were animals, that they were beasts of burden. And think about how that generates a different reaction to how you relate to those people over time. If that's inculcated, repeated, and repeated, it's always the same move. Take away the human face, take away the image, take away the human being, the humanity of the human being. I mentioned rats. We readily kill rats in our society. If we aren't comfortable doing it, we can pay somebody enough. Just send them a credit card payment. Don't even be present when they do it. We hire them to do it for us. Some with so-called, think about how we relate to animals. We, in our sophisticated society, don't see the animals that we eat, that we consume as animals, because we've changed the names so that we're not looking at the cow as the cow, we're looking at it as beef. We don't go to the market for pig. We go to the market for pork. We don't go to the market for a hen. We go to the market and pick up a packet of poultry. Just ask yourself for a moment about the power of that language change. And once we do that, think about that. When we change language, when we change those important labels, those identities, then violence feels less shocking. After all, who mourns the death of a cockroach or a rat or even a hen for that matter? So how do we counter dehumanization? I want to say it this way. See the human being before you place a label on them. And if somebody else labels them, then force yourself to look them in the eyes, whether you're in their company or not. See the humanity. See the human being, no matter how much you disagree with them. From Jewish perspective, again, my anchor point, we have this idea that every human being, Jew or not, atheist, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, everybody is created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. In fact, our originating story, our origin story in Genesis, isn't about the beginning of Judaism at all. That doesn't happen till later. It's just about the beginning of humanity, the world, a world in which human beings live in relation to their Creator. So this idea of being sensitized and sensitive and not being lazy and being rigorous in our humanizing of our opponents means that regardless of your beliefs, what you're doing is you're committing to using language that reflects your shared humanity. And instead of using a label which is lazy communication, you're using more words. Use the breath to say, example, instead of saying, I'm thinking about gun control, a big issue in America, and so it should be. People talk about this and try and get it right, maybe get it right, maybe don't. But you can you can characterize people who are opposed to gun control as a gun grabber, pejorative, or you can take the time to say a person who believes in stricter gun laws because they believe they save lives. All right, more breath, more words, but more accuracy. Or you could say a person who believes in lower taxes because it strengthens families instead of a greedy conservative. You see, this keeps the human being in focus. And what I want to suggest we do is not to be lazy about keeping the human being in focus always. So let's go back to the Tutsis and the Hutus in Rwanda. The radio broadcast that once filled the airwaves with songs and with casual humor turned almost imperceptibly from just dehumanization, cockroaches, to permission. That's the third crossing. That's dangerous. HTLM, the radio station, began broadcasting threats. They would say they are plotting to take your land. They're planning to kill you. Fear entered into the conversation, the broadcast. Violence became thinkable, even defensible. And then the euphemism, and listen to this euphemism, cut down the tall trees. Now, everybody knew in Rwanda what that meant. They knew which were the tall people in their society. One of the perpetrators of this massacre, this genocide, a man by the name of Denis Bakaruka, a brave man who spoke after the fact, later testified. He said, "We heard the radio telling us to be strong and to cut down the tall trees." He said, "Our local leaders explained that these trees were the Tutsis. We were listening to the radio, and because of that, and what the soldiers were telling us, what they were urging us to do, we started to kill our neighbors." I characterized him earlier positively as courageous or brave only in this regard, that he told us what actually occurred so we can learn from it. That's the anatomy of permission. That's when language changes into action. There's an idea that's called a straw man principle. And the straw man, you may know, is anything that you can knock down pretty easily. But the steel man principle, the steel man rule, runs counter to that. Before you critique your opponent in their thinking, before you debate, state your opponent's argument as fairly, as strongly as you can state your own. Then ask them, is that accurate? And if they agree, then go on and disagree. But steel manning in your conversation, in your debate, disrupts character. It reminds us that opponents, no matter what kind of opponents they are human beings with real fears, with real lives, with real desires, with real hopes. Challenge ideas, never, 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 never challenge human existence. And I want to say that again. Just think about this idea. Do you have the rigor? Do you have the rigor? Do you have the wherewithal? Do you have the willingness to become fluent in your opposition's ideas, in your opponent's thinking? So now comes the fourth crossing, and that's a crossing from permission to targeting. And this was harrowing in what happened in Rwanda. RTLM, the radio station, didn't stop at euphemism. They named names. They broadcast hiding places and homes. And suddenly the radio wasn't just a commentary on what was happening. It became a kill map. We see echoes today. Think about what happened in society fairly recently, and perhaps still happens on the web or on the dark web, when the mob doxes journalists, when addresses are shared of public figures online. At that point, words are no longer just words. They're no longer persuasion. They are coordinates. So how do you contribute? How do you and we actually contribute to countering this dangerous crossing? Well, one thing I would say in simple terms is never aid the mob. If you see a piece of private information shared, then stop it cold. This isn't debate. This is an attack plan. Don't forward it. Don't amplify it. Don't contribute to it. Build a culture in which that kind of behavior is treated with disdain, with disgust, with appropriate intolerance. And I say this to you on the web, and those of you on the dark web, God forbid, where you might be seeing so much of this, exactly this kind of crossing, this dangerous crossing occurring. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to implore you to be heroic in the simple stuff and trust that you're making a positive difference. And finally, the fifth of the 5 crossings, and that's from targeting to action. I can think of so many stories that we've read about and heard about in which there was this shift from a target, an address given, to action. In Rwanda, the broadcasters said these words. They said, simply go to work. They said, go to work. And neighbors who had once attended each other's weddings, whose kids went to school together and played together, picked up their machetes, and in 100 days, listen to these words, in 100 days, nearly 1 million were murdered. In 100 days, nearly 1 million people were murdered, and that originated with radio broadcasts. And that was accomplished not by foreign soldiers, but by neighbors. That's the final crossing, when words choreograph action. When somebody jokes about violence, even half seriously, say calmly and say firmly, not funny, not us, not here. And I say that, you might go, well, what's the difference? What if I do or don't say that? The first voice after somebody says something that is a form of incitement sets the tone. And you can talk to or read about psychologists who have said that this is called norm setting. The first voice after the incitement sets the tone. If you speak, you have the opportunity, I'll say the honor of resetting the room. So you can disagree, but you can disagree without disdain. You can see the human being instead of just resorting to laziness, which is labeling them. Even I think when we say Republicans, conservatives, think about, I've lived in multiple countries in the world. I know that this happens in all of these countries. Think about how lazy we get when we just say this group of human beings, and then we rush to judgment rather than humanizing them, because every one of them is a human being who arrived at decisions. They weren't born with them. Challenge ideas, but don't challenge other people's existence, their right to exist. You don't have that right, nor do I. You don't want to live in that world, neither do I. Never contribute to aiming a mob, whether the mob is visible to you or on the web, invisible. And interrupt before the danger ignites. There's a lit match in your hand. You have a chance to say, let me blow it out before it touches the fuse. So that's my map. And I think Rwanda shows us every step. Now, it's easy. It's easy to say, well, that's Rwanda. And that's not the United States. It's not New Zealand. It's not wherever you are. But pause and ask yourself a question. And this I want to ask you, knowing how many people have been posting online things that fall exactly into the category of what I'm about to characterize. Ask yourself, have you ever scrolled through the news and seen someone on the other side, and everybody has people who are on the other side to them? Have you seen the news of somebody on the other side harmed or, God forbid, killed? And have you felt a flicker of relief? Have you maybe even had a sense that the world was safer or better without them? Did you take some satisfaction in Charlie Kirk's murder? What about those of you who are older? Did you take some satisfaction in the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.? Or the attempts on the life of then President Ronald Reagan, or Pope John Paul II, or 2 attempts on the life of Donald Trump? That quiet satisfaction, that nod to your loved one or to your friends, is the seed. And if enough people water that seed, what feels unthinkable becomes imaginable, and then it becomes permissible, and then it becomes tragically inevitable. We're not Rwanda, but I think Rwanda is our map to better understand and govern ourselves. The truth is, in every society, the line between peace and violence, it runs through the tongue. There's a Jewish saying that the tongue is as sharp as the sword, as devastating as the sword. Violence begins in the meme. It begins in the repeated joke. It begins even in silence, which is communication, at times when we should actually speak up. So again, what can you do at your dinner table? What can you do in your social media feed? What can you do in your own community of family and friends? Well, here's a short code for everyday life. You can name the human being first. Name the human being. Always say it's, as I said earlier, the person who believes in this rather than saying the Democrat, the Republican, the Jew, the Muslim, etc. You can steel man rather than straw man before you disagree. You can build up their case, as an attorney might say, let me know what I'm going to oppose, let me understand it fully, let me be able to articulate both sides of this argument, and then and only then do I believe, the human right to that debate. I can't stress how important that is. We who believe in a principle, let's say in American terms, a woman's right to choose, that's a divisive issue, a contentious one, an emotive one in our society and in many societies. That's an example. Well, challenge yourself to fully understand the pro-life point of view, not just to characterize it or the people who espouse it, not to dehumanize them. Talk to them. Be able to debate the issue. And when I say talk to them, let me go back. Don't talk to the ignorant. Talk to people, seek voices, and we can do that these days, who are really bright, intelligent, educated, thoughtful, those people who can articulate the best version of the opposing point of view. Be able to debate the issue from their point of view as well. The same for the wars in our world. The same for, in our country, gun control, the same for immigration, the same for the myriad of divisive issues in all society, economic policy, all of these issues. Who's the better to lead us? Refuse mob targeting with your words. Don't forward names. Don't forward addresses. Don't forward what might ultimately be coordinates. And number 4 of my 5 points at the end here, a summary, is counterspeak on the spot. When violence is joked about, have absolutely no tolerance for it. Teach your kids, whatever age they are, teach your parents, no matter what age they are, no, not here, not us. We don't do this. Be the last person to speak on that issue. And rectify names. Don't exaggerate. Don't call policies genocide if they're not genocide. Don't change the definitions to fit your term. Don't call people traitors unless they're factually, precisely betraying. Precision cools heat. Challenge yourself to be precise. Whenever you find yourself being imprecise, challenge yourself to be silent, to say, I need to give that more thought. Let's continue this conversation when I've read more from other points of view, so I have a 360 point of view on this issue. That is a great way to engage. It tells the people around you that you care enough about truth, that you care enough about them and you to say, I want to learn before I teach. I want to fill the jug before I start pouring from it. And one thing I want to add is that I think it's imperative, and I think it's imperative more and more so, that you and I find the courage to rebuke our own side. That you and I find the courage to critique our own side. It's so easy to condemn the other. We'll get rah-rah and applause and algorithms that'll feed us and make us feel that we did the right thing. But what about when we have real courage in saying, this isn't my value being portrayed here. This person's actions or these words don't stand for me. And I might stand by them on other issues, but not on this. I always appreciate that in news broadcasters, when somebody's willing to say, this I critique, even if yesterday I had praise for that same candidate, that group, that party. I think we have to be able to say, don't talk like that. We don't talk like that. Not in this community, not in this country. So I started talking about Charlie Kirk as a human being. I hope, of course, I hope that was humanizing. I certainly wasn't using him as a puppet for a talk. He was a husband. He was a son. He was a colleague. He was a leader. His politics stirred admiration in some and anger in others. But I think his murder should unite us in grief, not only because it was him, whether you believe in him or not, believe in him as a human being. Once more, what we can do is we can step up. We can be unified in humanity, in our humanity. Once we normalize the idea that some lives are expendable through assassination, then nobody's safe. And you and I don't want to live in that world. We won't be led if leaders are unsafe. The worst will arise, not the best, to lead us. Let's not shrug. Let's not say that's them, that's not us. We tend to do that. Whenever we hear something that critical being said, something awful being said, we say, oh, that's what they do. That's not what we do. But let's look in the mirror. Let's refuse to cross what I delineated, what I called 5 crossings. Let's commit to this, to be people whose convictions are strong, but whose speech is careful. Let's be people who are, and I can't underline this enough, who are impossible to recruit for bad action, including bad speech and bad posting, and God forbid, cruelty. Let's not be recruitable for cruelty. Let's show courage. Let's be individuals who are known for our accuracy and our speech, for our accountability to the society, the community in which we live, for our kindness. Let's be known as pursuers of peace. Thank you very much for listening. For the Meaning Mindset, I'm Rabbi Ron Paz. I welcome your comments. I welcome you to share this with people who might agree or disagree. Let's keep conversation going. It's critical that we share thoughts, that we communicate with each other, and that we do so with great decency and great care.
This season is produced and edited by Jonah Paz. Content editing by Bronwyn Paz. Musical theme by Amotz Plesner. Logo art by Janice Radnunski. Graphic design by Gustav Paz. Social media management by Morgan Shanahan and Sophie Bergeron. The Meaning Mindset with Rabbi Ron is hosted by Rabbi Ron Paz. Find us wherever you find your podcasts.